The minority community faces deadly persecution in Burma. This as the de facto leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, insists that her government is doing its best to protect everyone in the northern state of Rakhine. But Rohingya who have fled describe large-scale violence perpetrated by government troops and Buddhist mobs. They say they've set fire to their homes and fired bullets indiscriminately into groups. Now, for more on this, I'm joined here by our international affairs editor, Armen Georgian. Armen, firstly, walk us through this humanitarian situation. What are aid agencies saying, and as well as neighboring countries?
Well, this figure's just come through from the UN Refugee Agency. So 270,000 people fleeing from Burma into Bangladesh in the last 2 weeks. That's actually significantly up on the previous estimate, which was 164,000 in the last 2 weeks. So that's obviously a huge increase on what was originally said. And, you know, if we take this away from numbers and talk about the people, we've heard, for example, Bangladeshi police describing bodies floating in the river which separate the two countries, speaking, of course, to the desperation of families and children whose bodies have been recovered as well, people getting onto boats that are obviously not fit for purpose and drowning. We had also today Human Rights Watch publishing a new press release detailing interviews that its researchers have done with Rohingya refugees, which again talks about the continuing persecution, including rape, arson and murder by Burmese security forces, according to these testimonies. Now, this is not a completely black and white situation, Molly, because it's also well documented that other populations have fled Rakhine. So not only the Rohingya Muslims, but, for example, Buddhist populations there who, like the Rohingya, have deep historical roots in that region. But, of course, if we look at the sheer figures, then we have to say that the Rohingya are the main targets.
Oh, well, then, Armen, it certainly is a complicated situation that's ongoing here. In Bangladesh, for the moment, the main player, as we said, then roughly 250,000 people going into the neighboring country. Now, they've demanded some immediate measures to curb the violence, but does it have any leverage on Burma?
Well, it's a huge concern for Bangladesh. In June, the foreign minister went before parliament and said that this refugee situation was creating a national security concern for the state of Bangladesh. And he cited drug smuggling, weapons trafficking and human trafficking in the border areas. And of course, these refugees are very vulnerable to human traffickers, as any situation like this would be. So it's a huge concern. And today I want to show you an editorial that was published this Friday in the Dhaka Tribune. Bangladesh needs to get tough with Myanmar, or Burma as we say on this channel. This has gone on long enough. Bangladesh can no longer afford to sit on the sidelines, this editorial says. And it mentions two agreements which Bangladesh reached with Burma in the past, in the 70s and the 90s, to repatriate Rohingya from Bangladesh back to Myanmar, Burma. And so now this editorial is calling for urgent talks to renew that same process, so as not to let this situation fester. But of course, as we've seen, Molly, the conflict has taken on such a vicious dynamic of its own in Rakhine that really nobody seems to be able to stop that dynamic right now. Again, to cite that figure, 270,000 refugees in the last 2 weeks alone, it doesn't look like Bangladesh can really bring about those urgent negotiations with its neighbor right now.
Armen, thank you for that. Armen Georgian, once again, on the situation in Burma.